Shalom, Chaverim. Boker Tov. A good morning to you, my friends, and to my study partners. We are going to be doing another session of Heartfelt Haftarah, and our Torah portion for this week is Vayishlach, which continues the story of our ancestor Joseph. And our Haftarah portion to go with that is the, fairly obscure prophet Obadiah. We'll talk about that in just a moment. So in our Torah portion, we have the story of how our ancestor Jacob continues to finagle back and forth between himself and his equally conniving father-in-law. And then his departure with his family and his property, and his effort to return to the land of Israel, the land that was promised to his family, and ultimately to confront and, in the pleasing conclusion to the whole Torah portion, reconcile with his brother Esau. And the reason that we have Obadiah is selected here is because he, in a different age and a different time, is also talking about the descendants, or the purported descendants of Esau, the Edomites. So this is a good moment for a little tent peg information to help orient us and follow along with why we're talking about what we're talking about. All right. So Obadiah is the shortest of all the minor prophets, and it's an odd one. One could be a little cynical and argue that Obadiah is included just to make sure that there are 12 minor prophets. You want to meet that 12 number. It's not a terribly powerful or poetic prophetic composition, and it's definitely a downer, but I think maybe in an effort to meet that symbolic number of 12 that Obadiah got included. Now that's a pretty dismissive analysis of what's going on, but Obadiah has some interesting things to say, and probably something that's very important for us to think about in the modern world, about how communities, groups, nations, ethnic groups oftentimes have interests versus true alliances or friendships. It's not like between people. So what am I talking about? All right. So Obadiah's entire focus, pretty much his entire focus, is on the kingdom of Edom. Now, tent peg, who is Edom and where are they? Edom is a ethnic group on the other side of the Dead Sea, over there on the east side, what we today would call Jordan and northern Saudi Arabia would be the area where they had their influence. They have always been perceived in the Bible as closely related to the Israelite people. They seem to share things in common. And as a result of that, there is a sort of expectation that there'll be some familial cooperation. Maybe you can imagine it today as sort of like United States and Canada, right? We have common origins in our being British colonies. We have the same experience of establishing a nation in a wilderness against first Americans, and a sordid history with all of that. So we share, Canadians and Americans share things in common, even though we have developed into very different countries. And likewise, in the ancient world, the Israelites seem to perceive the Edomites as people who were connected to them, but oftentimes their interests went back and forth. Okay, so that's the basis for this. Now, who is Obadiah? That has always been a point of controversy. There is another Obadiah mentioned actually among the early prophets, among the stories of Elijah and Elisha, particularly Elijah. Obadiah is a servant of King Ahab, who is a friend of the prophets. I wouldn't call him a spy, but he is someone in Ahab's court who will go to Elijah, report what's going on, alert him when there are dangers and things like this. So a lot of tradition wants to associate the Obadiah in the narrative with the Obadiah who has written this particular prophetic passage. There's really, if you look at the context of what's being said, that doesn't make any sense. This is a second Obadiah. He lives in the southern kingdom, and the fact that he has this grudge against Edom is really all about the fact that the Edomites aligned themselves with the Neo-Babylonians in conquering the southern kingdom and eventually destroying Jerusalem and the temple. So it's an understandable grudge. Obadiah the prophet felt like the Edomites should have been supportive of their Western relatives, and instead they betrayed the Judeans, and therefore he has a lot of anger, and in his prophecy he's primarily focused on the issue of how God is going to take retribution on them. Like I said, it's a bit of a downer. So that's enough of the tent peg of context. Let's instead talk about something within it that might be of interest to us. All right. So what I want to focus on is the rhetoric in which he talks about someone who should have been my friend, who has turned into my enemy, and how this is going to have consequences. Probably about as good as the poetry gets in Obadiah is verse 4 in Obadiah chapter 2. Though you soar high as an eagle and make your nest among the stars, I will force you down from them, says the Eternal. Were thieves to come upon you, or robbers at night, how you would be undone. Surely they would steal only what they need. Were grape pickers to come upon you, surely they would leave some gleanings. Yet Esau has searched out its secret stores, discovered. Your former allies have driven you to the border. Your confederates have betrayed and overcome you. Your companions have put a snare under your feet. Is this not beyond understanding? On that day, says the Eternal, it is I who will destroy the wise of Edom and destroy the understanding of Mount Esau. Mount Esau is sort of the Eastern Edomite equivalent of Mount Sinai. It's their sacred mountain. So people who were friends become enemies, and that's going to have consequences. Not much changes. We find ourselves with differing alliances at different times. And if I'm going to talk about something, maybe I'm going to talk about Russia and Ukraine and the Jews, because after all, that's us, right? So we are currently following, and I think most people in the United States feel the most compassion and the most support for the people of Ukraine. It's an odd situation to find ourselves in, because quite frankly, the history of Ukraine is a very mixed one for Jews. On the plus side, a lot of famous and influential Jews were effectively Ukrainians. They grew up in the territory that is now the nation of Ukraine. Just to give you two examples, the Baal Shem Tov, the great founder of Hasidism, is a product of Ukrainian Jewry, and Shalom Aleichem, the great writer, the person who gave us the stories that would eventually become Fiddler on the Roof, also a Ukrainian. And that doesn't even come close to exhausting the list of important Jewish Ukrainians. On the downside, there is a long and well-established, and even for Americans who we don't generally pay a lot of attention to Europe, we are aware that there is a long history of anti-Semitism and persecution within the Ukraine and among the Ukrainian people. We suffered from the Chelniki rebellion against the Polish Empire in the 17th century, and it was primarily Ukrainian Cossacks who inflicted tremendous suffering on our people in the Polish Empire, in Ukraine, in what today is Poland and Romania. Roving Cossacks killed 80, 90, maybe 100,000 Jews in their war against their Polish overlords. Somehow we took it on the chin. We represented the Polish Empire, and rape and pillage and murder was the order of the day. And we still remember that whenever Chekhov in the original Star Trek series, who supposedly is Russian, spits out the words Cossack at someone he hates, like, I don't know, the Romulans or whatever. He's portraying his Jewish background, the actor's Jewish background, because Russians don't hate Cossacks, Jews hate Cossacks. So that's one aspect of it. The Ukrainian culture in general was hostile to the Jews in their midst, and that becomes particularly amplified more recently. We remember that Ukrainians, in their quest for their nationalism, to escape outside of the Soviet Empire orbit in 1941, they welcomed the Nazis in the spirit of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. But more than that, many Ukrainians volunteered and served with Nazi forces, particularly and heinously. We remember that a lot of Ukrainians served as the guards in many concentration camps and death camps, where our persecution reached its apex. And so we associate Ukrainians with the most unrepentant anti-Semitism and brutality. It should be pointed out that this was also part of the Nazi divide and conquer. They usually selected guards who come from a different national origin than the prisoners. So it was Polish Jews found themselves ruled by Ukrainian guards. Ukrainians had no sympathy for Poles or Jews, and that was exploited. And of course, they didn't speak the same language, so that alienated them each other. This was a very deliberate Nazi policy, but that is not to dismiss how harsh the Ukrainians were to Jews throughout the 20th century. Now we find ourselves supporting Ukrainians. Our alliances have shifted. We care about the fate of the Ukrainian people in a way that 50 years ago they didn't care about us. This happens sometimes of necessity. Nations are not like neighbors. And it's a faulty analogy to think so. And that's what Obadiah is aware of. Even though generations of Israelites thought of the Edomites as their neighbors and cousins, in fact, the Edomites decided that it was much smarter to go with the giant empire, the Babylonians, and cooperate with them in the destruction of their neighbors, and all the sentiments that might have existed before came to naught compared to that. And Obadiah is rightly angry about that. So perhaps it's a lesson in real politics that as much as we would like to imagine groups would behave like individuals, they don't. They'll act almost entirely on their self-interest rather than on any moral principles. And right now, it's in our self-interest and our devotion to democracy and the security of Europe that we support the Ukrainians despite their anti-Jewish history. So I don't know that Obadiah has anything more to teach us other than to remind us that these things happen and that it's best for us to make decisions based on our current needs rather than our sentimental past, whether that's positive or negative. And that's the case here. So maybe it opens an opportunity for a new relationship between Jews and Ukrainians because we are such avid supporters, because the current president of Ukraine is a Jew. Fairly notable that the Ukrainians elected a Jew to be their president, not to be dismissed as a sign of a changing culture. Maybe we hope in the future that we can build a place in Ukrainian society where Jews can continue to feel safe and secure once this war is over with. I'm not sure that I can teach you much else except to remind us that we should look for peace and strive for peace. It's up to the Ukrainians to decide how this, when they are ready to sue for peace and call for peace. But when that moment comes, we need to be supportive. It's not helpful standing from afar to be more aggressive and more intransigent than the people who are fighting and suffering. So always remember, the best allies are the people who look for avenues for peace for the people we care about and the people we want to support. That's it for this Heartfelt Haftarah, and I look forward to talking with you next week. For this Heartfelt Haftarah, and I look forward to talking with you next week.